Welcome this morning. Ken Evans from City Communications. Just want to introduce the mayor for the weekly news briefing, Mayor Jeff Longwell.
Thank you, Ken. And we have some guests here today that's going to handle much of what we are going to discuss, but do want to acknowledge Councilmember Pete Meissner's with us today. I know there's a group of us heading out Monday morning bright and early with, I don't know, something like 50 chamber folks to head to, I do see Councilmember Miller, who's always here. Old news. I think Councilmember Miller and Councilmember Meissner are both joining us Monday in Nashville with about 50 other chamber folks on our city-to-city trip. So it should be valuable information. Looking forward to that. Today we want to discuss the Wichita Police Department's assessment. They have it queued up and ready to go. Do just simply want to add that the city provides many important services to this community. None more important than public safety and the way it impacts our daily lives. So in order to provide the best possible service to the community in regards to public safety, we have Wichita Police Department underwent a study and an assessment. The goal of providing recommendations in key areas, including body cameras, community advisory boards, qualifications for the new police chief, and community policing. And so today we have both our police chief and our city manager that's going to walk us through this PowerPoint. So I'm going to turn it over to Robert Layton. Bob?
I want to welcome you to the city manager's press briefing. Mayor, thank you for attending. We're going to talk about the organizational assessment. First of all, just a reminder of the background. Back in 2014, we had a retirement of our police chief, and at that time I decided it would be good to look at our department, its operations, and then to determine really what the city of Wichita's 21st century police department should look like. We employed Wichita State University to help us through that process, and in February 2015 we announced the findings. At that time we also promised that we would have periodic updates so the community would know how we were progressing on the report. Just again, for reminder purposes, what we did is when we worked with Wichita State, we asked them to go out and look at some of the best practices that were being followed throughout the country, especially in certain areas that I'll go over in a minute. We wanted them to talk to members of the department and as many members of the department as possible, and then also to the groups that have outside in the community who have expressed interest in police operations over the last few years. Once we had that feedback, we wanted them to take a look at all of our procedures and policies and come back with a series of recommendations that would serve as a blueprint for the department going forward, but probably even more importantly, as information to help me in the selection of a police chief and then to give guidance to the new police chief when he or she came on duty. These are some of the organizations that partnered with us through that assessment and who have continued to work with us in its implementation. And just a reminder of the areas that were looked at as part of the assessment. Body cameras were very important, and the commitment had been made by Mayor Brewer at the time that we would move towards body cameras for all of our officers, and so there was discussion of that in the assessment. A lot of discussion about community policing and better community relations. Talked, as mentioned, as shown on that last bullet point, a greater emphasis on cultural diversity, both in our recruitment as well as involvement of the community in the establishment of our policies. Recruitment, we needed to look at numbers as well as the makeup of our force, and to make sure that our police force was a good reflection of the community. Community Advisory Board, something we heard a lot about from stakeholders. They wanted to see more community input in the review of policies and incidents involving the police department. And then, of course, a great emphasis on transparency in our operations. So with that, all of this, Police Chief Ramsay was selected, came to town, second day on the job. I threw the assessment at him. I said, here, implement this. Of course, the good thing about Chief Ramsay is he had already started an implementation plan before I even talked to him. So with that, I'm going to ask the Chief to come up and give you a status report on some of the key recommendations from the assessment, and then we'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Well, good morning, everybody. So as the city manager did mention, the body cameras were fully implemented in July of this year. So all of the 425 patrol officers are utilizing that technology, and we're finding tremendous value in with it, particularly in the areas of complaints. We've had 27 complaints, and these are revolving around use of force that have been resolved with allowing the people to come in and watch the video. One of the interesting things is the whole, I mean, this is an evolution with the body cameras and policing and how they are used. We added a new portion of our complaint tracking process that tracks those complaints that are resolved after watching body cameras. So when someone has a use of force complaint, we invite them in and we'll show them the video. And what we see is that in many cases, they recognize that things are a little different from the perspective of the video camera. Oftentimes, we're seeing that many of the people were under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and that emotions had taken over. And when they watch the video, they are satisfied and leave. So we are actually tracking how many people are coming in to watch the video and then do not follow through with the complaint as well. And that's actually caught on nationally. I've spoken with some other chiefs who are interested in tracking this as well, and they've asked how we implement it in our database. So some interesting things along those lines. There's no doubt they're beneficial. We are also seeing officers when their cameras are malfunctioning that they immediately want to get a camera that is functioning. They do not want to work without the cameras. We've been busy attending many of the different neighborhood meetings that are operating throughout the city and have attended over 50 to date. We did the neighborhood cookouts where we've had officers really focusing on re-engaging with the community. 4 of them focused on youth, police and youth building relationships and trying to get youth comfortable with officers and what we do. After the Orlando incident, I met with several of the community leaders related to the LGBT community, and we have now assigned 2 officers that attend their meetings and meet with them on sensitive issues that come along the way and ensure that we are working well with them and have good relationships with the LGBT community, as well as we recently added a Hispanic liaison officer, not only for the media, but also for problems that occur in the Hispanic communities. We added a full-time public information officer previously. The lieutenant in that position was divided among many other duties. Nikki Woodrow is now in that position, as well as focusing on increasing our social media presence and doing things more videos for public education with Officer Davidson, who also helps Nikki out, and the commitment to the Spanish language media liaison by assigning Officer Cruz in that position. You're seeing more videos, and we're doing more blogging, and just trying to be more a part of social media in our community and connecting with the neighbors. I know I get probably 2 to 3 messages via social media a day from community members, more from you guys. But so that's just another way to connect. The Citizens Review Board, we are moving forward, meeting with community groups to establish what works for Wichita. There are national models out there, and different models work for different communities. So we're working through that, and we imagine that within the next 6 to 8 months, we will have a solid plan moving forward with Citizens Review. Mental health continues to be an issue. We are oftentimes the first government agency, first and last resort for mental health crisis issues. Our officers are dealing more and more with it on a daily basis. So we want to ensure that they are trained to de-escalate, understand what issues may be going through the individual's mind, and ensuring that we are very judicious in how we address these and use last force as a last resort, focusing on communication skills and not just that, but going beyond and ensuring that if there is treatment options or connections to resources that we can connect them with, that we're doing that as well. But 520 officers have completed the basic mental health first aid. We expect to have it 100% trained by the end of this year. And we've really connected with our partner in the world of mental illness, that is NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, where we are attending their meetings regularly and have assigned a liaison officer to meet with them to ensure that relationships are working well and that we are meeting their needs. And then crisis intervention training, which is a much more in-depth program for training officers on how to deal with people in crisis. We now have 114 officers trained. That is, it is time-consuming and expensive to train officers on that, but we have been committed for the last couple of years on ensuring that we train as many as possible. Use of force policy, there was some recommendations that have been made that we are, through use of consulting with national experts, also looking at best practices. And overall, the direction I want to go as chief as far as how we, what our policies state regarding use of force and my expectations on how officers use force. And we are in final stages of policy development, and I anticipate having those all completed later this year. And when those are done, we will meet with you again and go through what exactly those are. We continue to use data on how to deploy resources and ensure that we're focusing on crime reduction and quality of life improvement and resource management, utilizing crime trends and targets, hotspots. And we will be adding a crime mapping feature later this year that will also be an internal and external tool for us that helps us crunch those numbers to ensure that we are being responsive and nimble in our response when there are hot spots and issues that pop up. Fortunately, we are at our highest staffing level since 2009 with our recruit class that started in July. The retirements and resignations have slowed significantly from what was anticipated. And we hired, as you know, a staffing study, a company, Matrix, that is completing this study that is utilizing data both internally and externally on how we compare nationally and how we're handling cases and assigning them to detectives and where we fit in with best practices. As we wind down here, the discipline process of improvement, one of the national trends is rather than focusing on punitive issues toward officer misconduct, oftentimes we find that there is a training component that is being missed. The direction we're going with officer discipline has a training major education component based on LA County's innovative use of education-based discipline. And they received a grant to pay for, from the federal government, to pay for them to come to other communities that are looking at implementing this practice because of the success that they've seen there in reducing officer misconduct cases. So they are going to be coming here hopefully in the near future to present that to us. And we've already been doing research and adjusting our processes toward this philosophy. The most frequent complaint I receive as chief and the police department receives is traffic-related issues in neighborhoods. The traffic unit was decentralized around 2001 or so, and we are looking at the feasibility of bringing that back to the city based on neighborhood input and staff input. We're currently reviewing supervisory and space logistics as far as the feasibility of bringing that back. So that is a quick overview of all the things that we've been working on, primarily associated with the assessment. And I believe there's
one more item, and then we'll have the
Okay.
questions here in just a second.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes.
Appreciate it. And they're not running away, so you'll be able to ask them questions here in a minute. I will say that there are no better elements in our community than the wonderful giving groups that we have, and one of them that certainly understands this and the work that they do is the Lord's Diner. I can say, Pete, they literally understand cream rises to the top and practice it every day, probably. We have today with us Jan Haberly, who's going to share some additions that they're making at this time. So Jan, I'll turn the podium over to you, and thanks for being here.
Good morning. Like Mayor said, I'm here to share our news that we're going to begin serving in mid-October at the Atwater Neighborhood Resource Center. Several people have helped with our selection of that site. Mr. Layton, several of the city council members, the Greater Wichita Ministerial League, and the ladies that work at the recreation centers in that area, along with the Kansas Food Bank. So we feel pretty confident that that's a good site for our third mobile food truck, the more popular term, food trucks. We got into the food truck business about 3 or 4 years ago, and we've had great response, and we're very pleased to be able to go out into the community and reach folks that aren't really able to come to our 2 fixed sites. They've been, as I said, very successful, and we look forward to joining the neighborhood surrounded by the Atwater Resource Center. I think you all probably noticed that we just did a major renovation. That was to add kitchen space. Our original kitchen from 14 years ago served about 300 to 400 to 500 people, and when we've added the food trucks and the other site, we're up to about 2,000 to 2,500 meals a day. We project that the Atwater Center will serve about another 1,000, so we needed that kitchen to be expanded, and we also have a loading bay for our food trucks. So all of that was in preparation for this exciting time for the Lord's Diner. This Saturday, we'll have an information session at the Atwater Center, 2755 East 19th. It starts at 3 o'clock, so we've just invited folks from the neighborhood and anyone from the community that might be interested in volunteering and joining us on our food trucks. And then we'll have more training sessions and different things throughout the month of September and October. Our start date, what we're hoping to shoot for, is October 24th. That's a Monday. We will have a kind of a kickoff party on October 20th at the Atwater Center, and we'll serve meals to anyone any of you that like to come and join us on that day, kind of give you an idea of what the Lord's Diner does. But our actual start date will be the 24th. So if anybody's interested in coming to visit with us on Saturday, we'd love to see you. And I'll stay around for questions. Thank you, everyone.
That is good stuff and makes our community a better place. So we thank you very much. So at this point in time, we'll open up for questions. If you have questions on any of the topics or others today.
Yeah, this one, I apologize, Mayor, it's not for you, it's for the chief.
I'm happy.
No offense.
I'm happy for that. Chief?
Chief, just a question regarding the use of force policy. I know it's not finalized yet, but any major changes that you anticipate to see from the way it was and the way you want it to be?
Nothing major, but it's a lot of the national issues that we're seeing, that you're reading about, that police departments are evolving and adapting to. Primarily focusing really on communication and de-escalation and utilizing time and distance, and really integrating that into our training program and our policies. That's an overview of it.
How different is that from what's currently being taught and trained?
Well, there's more. Definitely, I would say it's more of a focus on this is my priorities that I want officers to be thinking about. Having a tactical disengagement plan rather than forcing crisis. If we can disengage and create time and distance, that's on everybody's side. So that's pretty much the focus. Yeah, and we'll present all that to you guys as it rolls out this fall. Yeah.
Chief, I know this is one of the things that we've spoken about before. It's kind of going also on top of what Scott was saying. Can you give us an example? I know you said at one point there had been an incident where someone had been about to harm themselves, and instead of actively going towards that person, you had the officers disengage, and how that has been something that some people may not understand what that will actually look like. Can you kind of go into some examples of what that might actually entail?
Well, that's primarily around people that are in crisis. And one of the concerns that we all have that I hear from the community as well as our staff and management is, when we get called to help someone who's in crisis that may be suicidal, and we end up using potentially deadly force on them, it doesn't seem right. And I want to make sure that when there is someone that is is suicidal, that we are very thoughtful in our approach and that we don't force a crisis. And it is not illegal to be suicidal. The one tough thing that we face is that oftentimes police are kind of, whatever decision we make, whether to force, if, let's say someone's locked in a room that is suicidal, they haven't done anything illegal, and the questions are, well, what happens if they do harm themselves if we don't go in? Or if we do go in and we force the crisis and we harm them. So there's a lot of, police work right now it's under the microscope, and we want to make sure that our policies reflect the values of our community and the city leadership. And, right now I think that some of our policies are a little bit old and outdated, and these policies will be updated to reflect the direction that our community and our city leadership wants to go.
Going off of the discussion about mental crises, how did the partnership with NAMI come about? Did you guys approach them, or did how did that come about?
Well, it's a wonderful organization that really offers tremendous support for our community, for either those that suffer from mental illness or loved ones that do. And I met with them this spring, and we talked about how we could work, form a stronger relationship. And we agreed that having a liaison come to their meetings regularly and talk about how we can work closer together, address issues when they come up, and just have that connection. It's critical for success. And collaboration is what's going to help police move forward in issues, and working together with NAMI on potential legislative issues that can help. We're working together to get resources in our community. We have to be at the table and part of that partnership.
You mentioned that some policies are old and outdated. One of those that did change in July was allowing officers to have more lights and sirens. Can you tell us what has happened in the last few months since now we're seeing more lights and sirens?
Certainly. That's related to the in-progress crime where people are potentially being injured, or I can tell you that I've heard from numerous officers that have been appreciative of that change because they've responded to crime scenes quicker. I know we've had people in a home, I know of 2 occasions where we've had people that were in their home being burglarized, and the officers were able to get there in a timely manner to apprehend the individuals and prevent some bad things from potentially happening. So we have had some tangible results, successful results, as well as getting to the scene of robberies quicker, where we can set up perimeters and keep people in that perimeter so officers can apprehend them. I think it's been very successful. We have not seen an increase in crashes, and we monitor that very closely.
You also mentioned, back to the body cameras, 27 complaints have been resolved. How many in total have been issued so far?
Well, those were strictly, I knew this question was going to come up. Those were strictly use of force complaints. They weren't able to pull exactly how many we've had, about 250 complaints to date. That's general complaints. They weren't able to get it in a timely manner to say how many of those were use of force. If you want me to follow up with it, shoot me an email and I'll try and get it to you as soon as possible.
Chief, I had a couple questions about the community advisory board stuff. It says you guys are currently reviewing other cities' review boards of these big cities, similar sized cities to Wichita. I guess what?
Yeah, one of the big things that's come out of policing in the last year is the 21st Century Presidential Task Force on Policing, and it identifies really it's a roadmap for where police departments need to go as far as community relations and building relationships with the community. One of the recommendations in there is have citizens involved in the complaint review process. So this is in line with the task force recommendations from that, but the focus is different things work for different communities. Now, I would say probably only about 10% of the cities in this country have a review board, so they range in variety on what kind of authority they have. But what we are looking at is what works for here, and given our Cora and how that dictates what we can provide, contracts, what we can provide based on contracts, and so that's all going to come into play along with community input.
And does that drive home the point of having a transparent department?
Yes, yep, that's another way we can connect with the community.
One of the things that we've discussed has been the need for the ability to do more community policing. And I know that you're saying that right now we are at our highest staffing levels, but one of the goals that you had was that we'd be able to have more than one police officer kind of around. That way someone can go and be able to talk to people in the community and get an idea of what's happening, which kind of goes hand in hand with the intelligence-led policing. With our current staffing levels being the highest that it's been since 2009, are we going to be able to do more community policing, or is that still something that we'll be able to know what our capability is once we have more of that workload staffing study figured out?
Yeah, well, no, we've definitely increased our community engagement, and part of it is being invited to events too. So just a quick story: last Saturday we were invited to a church walk. St. Mark's was having a peace walk, and I got an invitation Thursday night about this, and we had 4 officers go there on Saturday and march with them and interact and have positive contact. And the feedback I got from the parishioners was very, very positive, and they appreciated seeing officers outside of the traditional enforcement role. And so as I pound that vision home internally, I also want the community to invite us to events as well. As I've said, it takes 2 to really make that relationship and community policing work.
I want to add to that too, because I know the police chief has mentioned this before. I can tell you the council and the city manager are on the same page on this. And community policing isn't about hiring community policing officers. We're truly trying to ingrain that philosophy all the way through the department so that every officer, in a sense, becomes a community police officer.
Got a traffic-related question. Very common, you say one of the most frequent complaints that you get. What do you envision that looking like? I know you want to go back to what it was. What did it look like? What do you want it to look like?
Well, it was decentralized to the bureaus, and a lot of the traffic officers that worked there now end up backfilling shifts or focusing on special assignments, not a true citywide view of where our problem spots were. So definitely want to be more data-driven in regard to our efforts to decrease crashes. It very well could involve utilization of motorcycles. I mean, there's different options that are on the table that we're working through.
So do you anticipate more traffic tickets? I mean, is there going to be more of a focus on issuing those to prevent crashes, not for the sake of?
Yeah, well,
at least I would hope not.
the goal of traffic enforcement is education and voluntary compliance. It's not about tickets. It's about reducing crashes. And I found in my career that we can do a lot with public awareness by working with the media, by being visible, and the focus is not going to be about tickets.
But then potentially more traffic stops for educational purposes than what we are currently seeing?
I would say you're going to see us focus more on crash areas and problem areas, and you're going to see more visibility. Thank you.
Well, Chief, thank you. Robert, thank you. And Jan, appreciate you being here and sharing some good stuff for our community. Thank you all for coming today.